Good morning. Welcome. So good to see you all. We're going to open this morning by reading from Psalm 27, the first 5 verses and then the last 3. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? When evildoers come upon me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my enemies, they stumble and fall. Though a host encamp against me, my heart will not fear. Though war rise against me, in spite of this, I shall be confident. One thing I have asked from the Lord that I shall seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to meditate in his temple. For in the day of trouble he will conceal me in his tabernacle. In the secret place of his tent he will hide me. He will lift me up on a rock. And then the last 3 verses. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a level path because of my foes. Do not deliver me over to the desire of my adversary, for false witnesses have risen against me, such as breathe out violence. I would have despaired if I had not believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. Let's pray. Father, we are so thankful that you have us, that you hold us, that there is no adversary that can touch us aside from your active participation and your loving knowledge and your careful care and protection for our souls. So, Father, I thank you for that comfort from your word this morning. And I thank you, Father, for the way the story of Esther demonstrates it so clearly. Father, would you meet us in our worship this morning, and would you encourage our hearts in those places where we're afraid? Meet us, Father, as we speak of our desire to trust in you and our choice to trust in you. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's stand and worship. Skilled to understand what God has willed, what God has planned. I only know at his right hand stands one who is my Savior. I take him at his word indeed. Christ died to save me, this I read. I find a need of him to be my Savior, that he would leave his place on high and come for sinful man to die. You count it strange, so once did I, before I knew my Savior. My Savior loves, my Savior lives, my Savior is always there for me. My God, he was, my God, he is, my God,
skill to understand what God has willed, what God has planned. I only know at his right hand stands one who is my Savior.
What a friend we have in Jesus.
All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful who will all our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Are we weak and heavy laden, cumbered with a load of care? Precious Savior, still our refuge. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Do thy friends despise, forsake thee? Take it to the Lord in prayer. In his arms he'll take and shield thee. Thou wilt find a solace there. When I can't see you, I know you're here. When I can't feel you, I will not fear. I will trust in you.
I will trust in you. I will trust. I will trust in you.
I will trust in you.
I will
Trust in you.
One more time. I will trust. I will trust in you.
I will trust in you. I will trust in you.
We began to learn this song last week. When the morning falls on the farthest hill,
I will sing his name. I will praise him still. When dark trials come and my heart is filled with the weight of doubt, I will praise him still.
let's go back to the top. When the morning falls.
When the morning falls on the farthest hill, I will sing his name. I will praise him still. When dark trials come and my heart is filled with the weight of doubt, I will praise him still. For the Lord our God, he is strong to save from the arms of death, from the deepest grave. And he gave us life in his perfect will, and in his good grace I will praise him still.
When the morning falls.
When the morning falls on the farthest hill, I will sing his name. I will praise him still. When dark trials come and my heart is filled with the weight of doubt, I will praise him still.
For the Lord our God.
For the Lord our God, he is strong to save from the arms of death, from the deepest grave. And he gave us life in his perfect will, and by his good grace I will praise him still.
For the Lord our God.
For the Lord our God, he is strong to save from the arms of death, from the deepest grave. And he the trumpet sound will wake. Death is swallowed up in victory when we meet our King of grace. Every year we thought was wasted, every night we cried out long. All will be a passing moment in the Savior's victory song. We will see our wounded Savior, we'll behold him face to face, and we'll hear our anguished stories sung as victory songs of praise. For behold, I tell a mystery, at the trumpet sound will wake. Death is swallowed up in victory when we meet our King of grace. Every year we thought was wasted, every night we cried out long. All will be a passing moment in our Savior's victory song. For behold, I tell a mystery, at the trumpet sound will wake. Death is swallowed up in victory when we meet our King of grace. Every year we thought was wasted, every night we cried out long. All will be a passing moment in our Savior's victory song. Every year we thought it was wasted, every night we cried out long. All will be a passing moment in our Savior's victory song.
Why don't you have a seat and let's pray together. Father, we just lean on your promise. We lean on your faithfulness. We lean on your trustworthiness. We lean on your eternity and on your goodness. And we know, Father, that you are able to make us stand because you have given all for us. So, Father, we stand and we rest in you. And we thank you for the hope that you've given us. So, Father, as we come to give our offering, we give in hope, we give in thanks, we give in joy. And now we ask, Father, that you would be blessed in our giving this morning in Jesus' name. Amen. So we'll pass our offering, but if you are a guest here, please don't feel compelled to give. It's an act of worship by the people who live here. Ready? Bob, come and lead us.
She was born into polygamy. Her family followed the teachings of Joseph Smith, including plural marriage. Like many young girls, she had been promised to a man who was her father's age. But she ran away. She chose hell over a life of polygamy. That girl was me. I was lost, alone, desolate. Then Jesus Christ found me and rescued me. In His love, I found real freedom. He is a shield to all who will take refuge in Him. This is why I can look back and ask, polygamy? What love is this?
I sang that song for more than 60 years, a song of praise to Joseph Smith, the prophet of the Restoration and founder of the LDS Church, the church I served as a bishop for 5 years. I knew the church was true. I was a faithful Latter-day Saint. My life has been built on certain truths, but wishing doesn't change the truth. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free." When I finally learned the truth about the real history and doctrines of Mormonism, I realized that I was following the gospel of Joseph Smith and not the gospel of Jesus Christ. I have come to learn that many others have made a similar journey out of the bondage of religion and into an authentic relationship with Jesus. And that's what this show is all about. Courageous people who want to share their story, hoping that you, the viewer, will discover the same new life in Jesus. So if you're a Latter-day Saint who is struggling with questions or seeking a genuine encounter with the Savior, we invite you to join us tonight. We have a joyful message that we want to share with you.
It's an old story. A young girl finds herself pregnant. But it comes as no surprise. It had been the plan all along. She had been forced into bed with a much older man. And it was actually the old man's wife who arranged this dubious encounter. This sort of thing isn't so unusual in polygamist cultures like this one. After all, it is the wife's responsibility to bear children for her husband. And the older wife was past her childbearing years and had never been able to conceive. So she reluctantly did what had to be done. She got her husband another wife, one who would give him what she never could. At first, they rejoice at the girl's pregnancy. Finally, there would be children in the home. But the rejoicing doesn't last long. When the pretty young girl's pregnancy begins to show, the older woman grows bitter and finds herself consumed with jealousy. She begins to take it out on the poor girl, victimizing her yet again. Finally, a day comes when some fit of rage is the last straw, and the young girl decides it would be better to take her chances out in the unforgiving world rather than languish in her abusive prison. So she escapes. Sadly, things go from bad to worse for this poor girl. She has no means of survival in the harsh reality of the outside world. Hopeless, alone, and destitute, she sits down and hopes that death comes quickly. You may recognize this as the sad account of Abraham, of Sarah, and the maidservant Hagar. You can read all about it in Genesis chapter 16. But this story repeats itself over and over today in thousands of polygamous homes right here in North America. Women who know only oppression, who are unwitting pawns in other people's schemes. Women who have never known a God of love, a God of compassion, a God who is near. They have known only abuse, abandonment, and hopelessness. The young Hagar had a different experience. As she wept in despair, God saw her. He came to her, met her needs, and strengthened her to face her difficult circumstances. In wonder and gratitude, she said to him, "You are the God who sees me." But what about the plight of the thousands of women who are living Hagar's nightmare right now, right here in our own nation? Does God not also see them? Will He not also come to their rescue?
I prayed every day Dear God, help me get out.
I just pleaded with God. I wanted to die. I didn't want to do this. Every day I would wake up just feeling like I don't want to do this. We were always afraid.
There's a lot of fear growing up in polygamy.
You just want safety.
I wanted to run, I wanted to leave, and felt like I couldn't. I was now trapped.
Either you choose to live polygamy, or you're going to go to hell.
I hated my life, and I would wish somebody would come and kidnap me and take me away.
I had no idea what polygamy was actually going to be like.
Even if leaving means going to hell, I'm already there.
All these men did whatever they wanted to all these women in my life, and sometimes me.
I was given as a third wife to a man that I'd hated since I was 9.
And I couldn't do what I would think about it.
I was born here, in the land of the free, a slave in a polygamous cult, and my story is not unique.
Missionaries knocked on our door when we were married but didn't have any children.
We were always incredibly strong and faithful in the LDS Church.
Joseph Smith was a prophet, and the LDS Church was the only true church on earth.
You didn't even think that there was any world outside Mormonism.
And we just kind of dug in and never gave it a second thought.
You know, just following the religion, the Mormon religion was all I needed.
I believed it with all my heart.
We had a real heart for the church. We believed in the church.
The LDS Church was the only way.
Even though I was living the commandments outwardly, I still felt like something was missing.
There's the things that you kind of put up on the shelf.
I wanted so bad to not know that.
You begin to feel the weight of that shelf that eventually breaks.
What if what you've believed all your life isn't the real Christ? It does have eternal consequences.
God began to change my life in amazing ways about 6 months into my 2-year mission experience.
Is penciled into some missionary's little black book, and they are returning this Friday for a chat. I can't do this.
Most Christians are torn. They sincerely want to talk to missionaries, but we've always had our reasons based on misunderstandings and fears for not opening our doors to them. When you talk to an LDS missionary, you are talking to them when they're exploring and testing their own beliefs. It's absolutely the best time for them to catch a glimpse into your own experience of God's extraordinary grace and love. So won't you be an open door? I've got 5 simple tools I can share with you that'll equip you for this.
Ooh, I like the sound of those.
Understanding their prepared lessons is one tool. Another tool would be understanding the big picture of their plan of salvation. The next tool would be learning a few simple questions that a thinking investigator really ought to ask. And then you need to know how to express your personal experience with Jesus in a way that will make sense to them.
This is really gonna work, right?
Oh, absolutely. Your whole attitude will do a 180 by Friday. I promise.
The night of my wedding was the saddest day of my life. Every day you worried and wondered if you would ever make it, if you could ever work hard enough to be worthy of heaven. And one day, God showed up. Says, I have a gift for you. Will you receive it? I don't think I understood grace at all.
Honestly, I never knew what grace was. I don't remember hearing the word grace growing up.
Grace was an unknown kind of vague thing out there that people threw around, and
the only thing I knew about grace was it was a blessing you said before a meal or someone's name.
And I didn't really understand what it really meant.
It never really applied to my life growing up. After I'm saved and I find out that it doesn't matter who I am, that God's grace saves me if I will just trust Him for everything.
And to think that God took what I deserved. He took my punishment. And He gave me what I don't deserve. It is mind-boggling, but He does. And it just speaks to His love, His great love.
So I found out in my reading that we're saved by grace, not by works. And it's those three words, not by works, that threw me up on the ceiling. You had to peel me off. I couldn't believe it wasn't by works. It's just an amazing concept when everything is performance-based and you're always failing. You're always living with shame. You're always living with I've got to do better, I've got to do better. When you're saved by grace, and grace is receiving what you don't deserve, and we know we don't deserve it, we know we're not worthy, but God does it anyway.
I tell you, people, it's the greatest love story ever told, and I just weep with gratitude. Every single day, I thank God for my freedom. I thank God for the truth. I thank God that I have been given the keys that unlock the prison doors.
And grace is something that gets me through all those things that I think I can't get through.
There is power in knowing the truth. Know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And if God sets you free, you are free indeed. And I am free because Christ has set me free.
Undeserved favor, a free gift from God, and something He just gives me without, that I didn't deserve or earn or anything, and He just gives me His grace.
Oh. Right. So gentle. I'm getting the air horn. Uh-oh. We lost our picture, Glenn. Oh, there it is. It's going in and out. Well, I'll give you a brief report next week on our trip. We took a trip down to San Diego this week. Drove. Saw a lot of the country. I've never seen the Mojave Desert when it was raining cats and dogs. That's such a very strange to be in the Mojave and it's raining. It's like, well, no, this is the desert. It's supposed to look like Mars, and it does. So that was kind of fun. We'll tell you more about that next week. I'll show you some pictures. But I dropped my film off at Walgreens. They're developing it right now. So that was because all the older people are going, oh, yeah. Younger people are going, what? Yeah. So, hey, we're back to Esther today. Back to Esther. By the way, if I say Ruth, just correct me. I'm still so stuck on Ruth because we finished Ruth, and I just love Esther. So it looks like we're doing a tour of the Old Testament women. In fact, I might change my plans after we finish Esther. I have another Old Testament woman we might want to look at. I'm not going to tell you. What that'll do is I'll start getting people lobbying me. So can we look? No, we'll see. But anyway, let's stick with Esther for now. Have you ever been to court? Don't answer that question. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't ask why. Yeah, I'm not going to ask you why you're in court. And I was there with a friend. Yeah, I've been in court too, speeding tickets and stuff like that. What I'm always impressed with in court is how they try and create this atmosphere of fear. That's a weird word, yeah. it's fear. Yeah, I was going to say austere. I couldn't think, no fancy words. It's just, yeah, it's sort of intimidating. It's very intimidating, in fact. So, and that's on purpose. That's on purpose why they do that, because this is a serious business. This is where things get corrected in our culture and stuff like that. Well, what's more scary is if you're there in court and they're looking at you like this, and you think, oh no, there are actually people who are employed and who are volunteering to put you in jail. And that's kind of a scary idea, that there are people actually there to do you harm in that particular sense. And so if you're ever there, you may not be in this position, but it can be extraordinarily intimidating to be in a place like that, because you wonder your whole fate, where you're going to go and what's going to happen. It seems like you're totally out of control. There's these gigantic powers of the law. So when you go in a court like this, you hope that everyone's fair. You hope that everyone's dealing well with you. You hope you have someone who's telling your side of the story well enough. But every now and then, your mind sort of goes back to something like Alice in Wonderland, and you wonder if I'll get a judge who's kind of like this, off with his head, and there will be no justice at all. So I'm being a little flippant about this, but as we go into Esther, we're going into one of the most fearful court scenes that is in the entire Bible, where actually it's a life and death, it's a lethal kind of thing. And it's staggering to the bones. And we're going to lead up to that today, and we'll actually be in the court next week. But it's a very fearful kind of thing. So just to recap a little bit on Esther, as we've come into Esther, we started the story last week. Before we get to the courtroom at the end, starting at the end of today, we got to the point in chapters 1 and 2, to recap, chapter 1, where we're in Persia. We're in the city of Susa, which is Susa the citadel. It's actually the center of the entire Persian empire. It's gigantic. It goes all the way from Turkey to India. It's parts of Ethiopia. It goes up in parts of the Slavic areas. I mean, it's a gigantic area of the world. It's only tiny bit smaller than the kingdom of Alexander the Great. It's a gigantic thing. So we're in Susa. The king Ahasuerus, and I'm not going to say his name too many messy ways, Ahasverosh. But Ahasuerus is the guy who's the king. In chapter 1, we saw him do a pretty insensitive thing with his wife, the Queen Vashti, after a gigantic party blowout's going on, and he wants to show off his trophy wife to everybody. And she says no. And so she gets deposed and replaced. By the way, we have no clue what happened to her. So just let your imagination run wild on that. We have no clue what happened to Vashti, but she needs to be replaced or she's not going to be put away. She is replaced by them having a kingdom-wide beauty contest. No kidding, a kingdom-wide beauty contest, because the king's advisors say, well, if you're going to replace the queen, get a nice-looking gal. So they have this gigantic beauty contest of sorts, although it's a little more severe than that. They actually go around and round up the beautiful young women in the entire kingdom, bring them all into Susa. They have then basically sort of a year-long prep time. They have sort of a beauty contest with an audience of one, the king, and he selects someone, and it just so happens that the woman that he selects to be queen to replace Vashti is this gal, this Jewish gal who's in exile from Israel, and her name is Hadassah, which means myrtle. So if you have a relative named Myrtle, you can start calling them Hadassah if you like. That's your grandmother's name is Myrtle, yeah. So she becomes queen. She becomes queen, and so last week we left her there becoming queen, basically winning the lottery of sorts. But not really, because she's married to a guy who did to the previous queen what you hope he'll never do to you. And the whole selection process is kind of seamy. I mean, there's just a lot. She's in a great position of privilege in the entire world, but it's sort of icky in a way. So that's where we left us last week. And the story proceeds today, and it gets a little bit more sticky. We start in the narrative in chapter 3, what I call a right-hand man. So we'll just jump in. Esther 3, the story goes on. So after these things, meaning after Esther becomes queen, after these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And if you remember back to chapter 1 when they had the big blowout party, there were the 7 officials who were in charge of the entire kingdom. He's not one of those guys. This guy is put above them. So this guy is now the vice president, the vice king of the largest empire on earth. Okay, so this is Haman. Haman's a guy, he's put above all of them. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. So he elevates him to be his right-hand man, and he tells everybody, you will treat him and respect him like you do me, the king. You will bow down when I come past. That's just the way it is. So in a real sense, Haman is the stand-in for the king in many ways. So when the king goes down the street, you bow down to him. When Haman goes down the street, you bow down to him. So Haman's put in this gigantic position. And then we have some impudence. Had to look up that word. Okay, never mind. Okay, Mordecai, who you remember is the uncle guardian of Hadassah, Myrtle, renamed Esther, the Star, that's her new name, who's now queen. This is her uncle guardian. So remember Mordecai? Or you can just call him Morty. That's what you do if you live in a Jewish community. You call him Morty. So Morty did not bow down to pay homage. So this Haman guy got under Morty's skin, and he would not pay homage to this guy. He would not bow down when he went past. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate, which is where Mordecai hung out, they said to Mordecai, hey, why do you transgress the king's command? I mean, what's the big deal? I mean, just bow down to this guy. Why are you doing this? Well, when they spoke to him day after day and he would not listen to them, they told Haman, the new second in command, right? You would think that Haman would notice, because as Haman would go down the street, everyone would bow down as he's going by, but Mordecai wouldn't. I think Mordecai probably just slunk off so he wouldn't have to be like this in front of Haman. But these guards at the gate, they don't understand why does Mordecai won't bow down to this guy. Now, presumably, and we don't know this, but presumably Mordecai is bowing down to the king. He's been in the presence of the king, that whole beauty pageant with his niece and stuff I mean, surely he was in the presence of the king somehow or with people in charge. So we don't think it's Mordecai's resistance to actually respect the kingdom and the guys in charge. It's not that. There's something personal, we think, between Mordecai and Haman. And Haman might actually be a jerk. And that's the best speculation we can come up with. And on the basis of that, Mordecai is going, no way, I'm not bound down to the jerk. So that's probably what's going on here. So they go and they tell Haman. Why? In order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. Now this is an interesting juncture. Remember what Mordecai kept telling his niece not to do? don't tell them you're a Jew. And so in the midst of this whole thing, in this refusal, this impudence not to bow down to Haman, the new second guy in charge, somehow Mordecai lets loose the idea that he's a Jew. And so he says, I'm not going to bow down to you because I'm a Jew. Well, I don't think that stopped him before. So that's why there's something more going on. And Mordecai is making a tragic error right here, admitting he's a Jew. Because the Jews were in minority in the country. Remember, they got taken out in captivity from Nebuchadnezzar during the Babylonian Empire, sucked out of the country, made slaves in the entire Fertile Crescent, all that kind of stuff. They're there as minority slaves or as freed minorities, but they're there. And by the way, a little piece of history right here. At this point in time on the calendar, Israel has now been, they were invaded by Nebuchadnezzar, taken out as slaves in 586 BC. That happens. Now we're about 120 years after that. And interestingly enough, in the timeline of things, they got to go back into the promised land about 70 years after they were taken out. So now we're about 50 years after people started trickling back into the promised land. So why is Mordecai and Esther still there in the Fertile Crescent, in the Babylonian, now the Persian Empire? Why are they still there? Why didn't they go home? Which is a nice lingering question right here. In reality, they're not alone, because we know that after this captivity, and a lot of them get taken by the Babylonians, eventually the Persian Empire, they never go home. And that's the genesis of this myth about the lost 10 tribes. It's more than that. It's the Assyrian captivity and Babylonian. But it's the idea that people came in, they invaded Israel. Israelites were taken out of the promised land. They went into these other places, largely this Fertile Crescent, now where the Persian Empire is, and they just never went home. And in fact, that's true. Many of them never went home. And to this day, when you find Jews that are dispersed across, especially Eastern Europe, they are actually the descendants of these people who were taken out in this invasion, just never went home. Well, Mordecai and Esther are some who never went home. But their kin have been going back to the promised land for 50 years now. In fact, the temple there is being rebuilt right now. And Mordecai and Esther are still here in Persia. So anyway, he lets loose that he's a Jew, and like maybe it's a principle thing. I don't know. So they tell this to Haman. Well, what's Haman's reaction? Well, when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury, which is why we think he's a jerk. Or something. Okay, so in a normal society, if a second in command, there was someone who was being impertinent like that and didn't bow down, you just tell a guard, well, just go out and kill the guy. If he won't bow down, we'll just take him out. It's just not worth my time. I'm having lunch. It's just a nothing issue. But for Haman, it's a huge issue. I mean, he's enraged, which tells you there's a pride thing sort of going on here. There's more going on than meets the eye. That might be part of the motivation behind Mordecai not really paying him respect. So Haman's filled with fury. So what's he going to do? Just kill him? No. He disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So he's got something cooking in his head. He could, and would make more sense for him just to go and have Mordecai killed. Or do like what happens in the New Testament, bring me the head of John the Baptist on a plate. Something like that. That's what you'd expect to happen. But this Haman is so twisted and so much of a jerk. He wants to take down more than just Mordecai. He wants to go bigger than this. He wants to do a big hurt. So, as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, the Jews, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews. Won't that make Mordecai feel bad? See, this is where he's going to. This is why he's a jerk. He sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. So he could have just dispensed with this by dispensing with Mordecai. But the offense was so severe, and Haman is such a jerk, he decides, let's just take down a couple million people instead. Who does that? Now, if you think about the size of this massacre, here's a picture, a map of the Persian Empire. It's hard to tell. It's the pink part, the pink and red part. And if you see on the upper left over there, there's Turkey, all of Turkey. Down the bottom left, that's Egypt down there. And then up through the Promised Land, Israel, through Syria, through present-day Iraq and Iran. The Persian Gulf is on the bottom down there. And Susa is right there. Susa is right on the upper part of the Persian Gulf. And then the line you see on the far right that goes up, the far right line, that's the Indus River, so that's the edge of India. So that's how big this place is. So what Haman is saying, even though I could just take out Mordecai, I'm going to take out Mordecai's people, every single one of them. Well, they're all dispersed through roughly this region right here, this yellow region right here. They're all through that area. That's the size of the original Babylonian Empire when Nebuchadnezzar came in. So they're probably in that crescent. So what he's saying is, I'm going to put out some kind of edict and I have every Jew killed that's in this region. But like I said before, they've already gone back for almost a generation and have started repopulating Israel after those takings away, these invasions by the Babylonians and the Assyrians. They're already back there. They're rebuilding the temple, and pretty soon they're going to start rebuilding the walls. I mean, there's action going on. So we're actually talking about all the people too, the Israelites, who've already gone back to Israel after the captivities. That's going on. So what Haman is saying is, I want to kill every single one of them, even all the people that have gone back to their original land. We're going to take the whole thing out. This is a Holocaust on a gigantic scale. Gigantic scale. And why? Because Mordecai wouldn't bow down. Fortifying again, Haman's a jerk. So there we go. So that's what he's talking about. That's the scope of this. So in the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, they cast lots before Haman day after day, and they cast it month after month till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. So what's going on? Well, they cast pur right there, and that just means lots. Simply, it's like throwing dice, is what it is. But what are they throwing dice about? I thought the story arc was, he was so mad about Mordecai not paying respect to him, he's going to kill all the Jews. So why are we now throwing dice? What? Well, you have to understand the culture there as well. Because Haman is trying to come up with a plan to kill all the Jews. How do you kill all the Jews across the entire kingdom in an efficient way? Yeah, in an efficient way. We can't just send armies to the entire kingdom and have them kill all the Jews. There's got to be another way to do this. So he comes up with this plan. It'll become more apparent in just a second. This comes up with this plan to have all the Jews killed on one day. And the trouble is that in this particular kingdom, when you talk about the Persians, they're very, very oriented about the right days and the right month. You know, like horoscopes, this is your month to do such and such or such and such a day. They were very much ruled by this whole idea about coming up with the auspicious day to do the perfect thing or the month to do the perfect thing. So the way you determined when a day was good to do something was kind of horoscopy, but you read the stars and you cast lots. You throw dice and you figure out. So what he's doing is he's doing his early planning on how to wipe out the Jews in terms of putting it on the calendar. Where do we put it on the calendar? So that's what they're doing right there. They're casting lots for this. By the way, it's all this idea about superstitions, about the days, auspicious dates. Fate is something you can determine if you cast lots enough or if you read the stars. It's all that kind of idea. Come up with the perfect day and we'll take out all the Jews on that particular day. By the way, before we pass on, that word pur, that's a Persian word for lots. That's all it means. Throwing lots is casting stones and stuff like that. Predicting the future based on that kind of stuff. And so to this very day, when the Jews celebrate the story of Esther, the celebration is called Purim. Purim. And it looks kind of like this. Okay? So there it is. That's actually the Persian word for lots, Purim, and the im it means the plural extension of it, so it's lots. So the entire celebration that the Jews do today is named around the lots they're throwing of trying to figure out what day to kill all the Jews, which is a little on the odd side. Why don't they call this the Feast of Esther? Yeah, it's Purim. And not only that, it's a really dark sort of thing that they would name this celebration over Purim, which is casting lots in an occultic way to figure out the best day to kill everybody. But then when the Jews celebrate Esther right now, that it also, I think I mentioned this before, it's a really singular celebration by the Jews because it's sort of a cross between, for us, Halloween and April Fool's Day and a couple other just raucous, and Mardi Gras. It's kind of all those, you put all those together. You know how big and loud they are? Jews, when they celebrate Esther, they'll dress up, which is why you have masks right here. There's noisemakers. You see that in the picture up on the right? That's those ratcheting noisemakers. When you spin them around, they make all that noise. And we're going to do this in a couple of weeks. Well, when you mention the bad guys in the story, when you read it aloud, you try and drown out the mention of the bad guys by making noise. That's what it is. So it's a very different celebration by the Jews. And it's interesting too, but when you compare it against the other celebrations the Jews do contemporarily today, it's the only one that God did not command. They sort of made it up as they go. Oh, really? Yeah, and it's the one that's usually most anticipated by the Jews because it's so much, sort of like a Mardi Gras, Jewish Mardi Gras in a way. It's very interesting. And by the way, when I was growing up in a Jewish community, these little pastries right here, I loved those babies. I had no clue what they came from, but in the Jewish delis in the area that I grew up on the East Coast, one time of the year, and it usually would be late February to early March, because of Purim, they would make these particular things. There's kind of fruit-filled little pastries. They're called Hamantaschen. And Hamantaschen means Haman's hat, Haman's hat. And so, I put down a lot of these as a kid. And then, when you get to Easter, they'd all be gone. And go, oh, man, they're all gone. Yeah, Hamantaschen. So they're really fun to eat. Usually the fruit filling inside, at least where I grew up, wasn't like raspberry or stuff like that. It was prune. So I got to love prune, actually. Anyway. So Purim, it's all about the lots trying to figure out the day to kill all the Jews. I told you, it's kind of odd. So there you go. This is a very Persian occultic idea to kind of figure out how to unfold this plan really well. So then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, he says, okay, king, there's a certain people, okay, the Jews, there's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws, they're different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it's not to the king's profit to tolerate them. You shouldn't tolerate these people. They don't really obey you. And of course, Ahasuerus is listening with full ears because this is the second in command. So, if it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. Yeah. And I'll pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries. Evidently, Haman's not only a jerk, but he's a rich jerk. Because what he's saying is, let's do this. Let's destroy the Jews. And all the people who are going to say, oh, it's a hassle, it's a lot of work, I'll pay just a gigantic amount of money to these guys, which will eventually go in the treasury. And king, you'll get rich. So I'll pay all the expenses of killing millions of Jews. I mean, where's the downside? Oh, King Ahasuerus, where's the downside? So he makes his proposal to the king, and he's going to pay for it to just eradicate the Jews. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha. He gave him his signet ring. So from now on, this enemy of the Jews can write orders and stamp the signet ring of the king on it and have the official order of the king of Persia. He just gave him his, it's like giving someone your credit card. You don't give some, but this is the credit card to the entire kingdom of Persia. You can make up anything you want, write it on a piece of paper, stick some sealing wax on it, signet ring, and they'll do whatever you say and do it in the name of the king Ahasuerus. What a tremendously bad thing. The enemy of Jews. So here you go. Here you can write all these things up. You can write anything you want. You can claim that the king himself is sending this, and the king has no place to say, I didn't command that, because he gave you a blank check, a credit card, a signet ring. Do whatever you want. Stamp the ring in it, and I'm okay with it. Listen, if you ever become king of a gigantic kingdom, don't ever do this. This is really a bad idea. It's a really bad idea. So the king said to Haman, well, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you. So he's saying, yeah, go, run with it, Haman, run with it. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict according to all that Haman commanded was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces. We're talking Turkey to India, and to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. Because, the kingdom is just so gigantic, not everyone speaks Persian. It's different languages. So they decide they're going to put out this edict to destroy the Jews. They're going to write it in every language of every locale for every satrap and every local ruler and stuff like that. So they're making it very, accessible to people who don't speak Persian. And they're saying, hey, let's kill all the Jews in the languages of all the people across the kingdom. Wow. Wow. So it was written in the name of the king Ahasuerus. In the name of the king Ahasuerus, and sealed with the king's signet ring. So, the letters would basically say, I, King Ahasuerus, say, kill the Jews. But it's actually Haman's idea. Yeah. So letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instruction to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the Jews. What? You mean like, well, you must mean just like the men who are of battle age, right? They're the real threat to the kingdom. Like that? No, to young and old. Well, maybe just to men, right? Well, no, to women and children. You mean like everybody? Like everybody. So in one day, and they set the day based on their Purim, their Purs, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. So this dictate goes out in multilingual form from Turkey to India, Ethiopia and Africa. I mean, you name it, present-day Iraq, Iran, Kyrgyzstan, everywhere through there, in their language, on this particular day on the calendar, you can kill any Jew you come across. And oh, by the way, you can take all their stuff, just in case you're not motivated to participate in the plan. Kill them and take their stuff. So we'll send this across the entire kingdom. And then we'll just wait for everyone to kill the Jews. You don't have to send armies out. Isn't this great? You can take the Jews' stuff, and on that particular day, the king of Persia won't prosecute you and say this is illegal because it's totally legal on this day. In fact, the king is encouraging you to do this. So people will be motivated, and this gets sent out. The only plus side to this, if you're following the calendar, is it's almost 12 months away. Because when they're throwing their Purim dice, they ended up throwing it such that the day and the month they came up with was almost 12 months later. It was actually the previous month on the calendar. They go, oh, nuts! Now we've got to wait a whole year to get there. So there's a whole year that's going to transpire. So that's the good side is, if you're going to try and nip this in the bud, you got a year to figure out how to do it. But at this point, the letters are sent and the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. And by implication, it's illegal to kill a Jew before that day, but when that day comes, it's going to be a bloodbath. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. That day. It's going to be crazy. So the couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink. Clink. Hey, happy times are here again. Right? But the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. Can you imagine being Susa is the center of Persia. I mean, this is the capital. Even in the capital, people are saying, "What? Kill the Jews on this day, 12 months from now? What?" And of course, to all the other people who live in the Persian kingdom who are not Persians, they're thinking, well, today the Jews, tomorrow us, maybe? I mean, what? Where do we, what? So this causes a gigantic amount of confusion. But this is a win-win for both Ahasuerus and for Haman. It's like, dude, let's have a drink. This is the best thing ever. Wow. Well, so we come to Hadassah's appeal. See, maybe there's a way to nip this in the bud. Well, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and a bitter cry. Exactly what Haman was hoping would happen. Bet you feel good today, huh, Mordecai? I'm killing all your people, and you're the one at fault. How do you feel today, huh? So this is a pretty classic way for a Jew to mourn something like this, sackcloth and ashes. You put on basically disposable clothes. Think burlap or something like that. I mean, something where you're basically saying, I have, if you remember, clothing reflects your status, right? So if you put on something, if you start wearing burlap, for us, if you walk around in a barrel, I don't know, but if you're wearing something that has no status to it, you're saying I'm nothing. I'm mourning. I've been made nothing out of all this. So the grief takes you to nothing. I feel like nothing. So that's what he's doing. Normally, when you're in sackcloth and ashes in the Old Testament, there would also be praying going on. But it turns out the author of Esther doesn't mention praying very much, but all the things that are something and prayer are there. So we think there's kind of a deliberate attempt on the part of the author to keep the religious out of this, and we'll talk a little bit more about why. But when we see sackcloth and ashes, it's a religious thing that includes prayer and appealing to God. You'll see in just a second here. So he's going around with a loud and a bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And he goes up to the gate, and in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. So those actions right there in the Old Testament, you usually see connected with prayer and an appeal to God. Again, he's deliberately leaving the religious aspect out, not because God is not part of their picture, because they're mourning in a very Jewish religious way, but the author has reasons not to mention God overtly. But that's what's going on here. So all through the entire Persian kingdom, people are weeping and lamenting, and they've put the date on their calendars almost a year away. They're all going to die. Well, when Esther's young women, remember she's queen now, when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed, but kind of clueless. We'll see in a second here. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. So she originally sees him in sackcloth and says, well, if you need clothing, I've got clothing. Here, send him some clothing. Maybe we can fix this. She's clueless about what's going on. See that? Totally clueless. So Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai, probably because he refused the clothing, go to Mordecai and learn what this was and why it was. Why are you doing this? I don't understand what's going on. She's queen, but she has no clue what's going on. And in a second, you'll see why. Because she just doesn't see the king very much. So this is all going on behind her back. And she goes and asks her this eunuch to go ask Mordecai what's going on. So Hathach, he went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, not within it, because again, he's wearing sackcloth and ashes. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. And by the way, that amount was told, it's 10,000 talents, which is a heap a lot of money. That's a heap a lot of money. So 10,000 talents. So he says, look, this is what's going on, and Haman paid for it, and this much money is going to the king's treasuries. So Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for the destruction, and that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. So Mordecai makes this pitch to the eunuch that's attending to Esther, and he takes this back. So Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said, the whole story. And we think this is the first time Esther has heard what's going on here. And you know, if you're like me and I was in Esther's shoes, I'd be thinking, who's this guy I'm married to? this Ahasuerus. I mean, is he a monster? Well, Haman's clearly a monster, but my husband seems to be totally supportive. I mean, this is bizarre. So he tells all this to Esther. And then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, okay, listen, Mordecai, uncle, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know, they know this, she's implying that he doesn't, they know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, dun dun dun, to be put to death. So look, she's saying, everyone who lives in Persia knows this. You may not. But the deal is, when the king's inside his chambers in this place where he does his official business and stuff like that, if you're not invited in, you don't go in. You just don't bust in there and say, listen, I've got an appeal from all the villages in Turkey that we want to... No, you don't do that kind of thing, because if you bust into the king's presence and you're not on his agenda, you die. So asking me, Hadassah, and now Esther, asking me to just bust into the king and make an appeal, I'll die. You don't understand. You just don't do this here in Susa. You don't do this here. You'll be put to death. However, except, the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, well, I haven't been called to come into the king these 30 days. So she says, so this is the rule. You bust into where the king's doing his business without being on the agenda, you'll just be killed. You won't even be able to make your appeal. That's just the way it works. However, if you bust in and the king holds up his golden scepter, he can say, yeah, that's okay. Let's listen to what's going to happen here. So that may happen. So that's there. But it really is up to the whim of the king. I mean, what if he's smack dab in the middle of a really important thing he's doing, and someone comes busting through the door and says, King, I have this very important issue. And he says, no, I got more important things. Kill that one. And they're out of here. So that's what's going to happen. Well, and here's another problem. At this point, the king does not know that she is a Jew. So that sort of complicates her busting in to say, hey, honey, I've got this issue. And if it's about the killing of the Jews, he'll say, well, so what's the big deal? They're just kind of pests in our kingdom. They don't follow our law. I mean, why do you care? Right? Well, I'm a Jew. So here's the whole problem. For her to bust in, not only could she die, but she has to admit she's a Jew, which is what Mordecai said never to do, which is what Mordecai did, and now we're in this predicament. See how crazy this is? So she sends this back through her eunuch, and they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Well, so Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, look, don't think to yourself that in the king's palace you'll escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, well, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. So just because you think you're the queen and you're in the king's household and this edict goes out and you try and act cool like, I never heard about this, don't think that you're going to escape this. And in the back of your mind, you can hear him say, Vashti. Remember Vashti? She just didn't show up for the party and she was banished. Vashti. She knows what this king is like. You're not going to escape. You're not going to escape. Because it's very likely as well, since we know that Mordecai is building in our character profile a monster jerk. And he'll expand that character profile in the next couple of weeks. But we know that's going on. I mean, if they actually carried out the edict and all these Jews were killed, and then Esther held her tongue, didn't act like she's not a Jew, doesn't know what's going on, all this kind of stuff, eventually Haman, who hates Mordecai, who will figure out that Mordecai and Esther are related, will come into the king someday and say, your queen's been deceptive. Remember all those Jews we killed? She's a Jew too, because she is related to the Mordecai guy. So Mordecai's right. Even if you stay inside the king's household, you're not going to survive. You're not. But then he says that weird thing in the middle, and we'll come back to that. So, even if you don't respond, even if you keep silent, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. That's interesting. So he's saying, even if you don't step right now and do the right thing, God's still going to provide some deliverance. It's just going to come from someplace other than you. But for you and me, we'll both die anyway. And we'll come back to that thought in a minute, because that's a fascinating thing he interjects there. So he's telling her, you're not going to save your skin if you do nothing here. And then, one of the most famous phrases in the entire Old Testament, literally the entire Old Testament, he says to her, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Maybe this is why you won the beauty pageant. Maybe this entire thing was putting you in place next to the king for this very purpose. It's this. Are you willing to trade all that you have so that you can go into action now? God put you in this position, clearly, with this pagan king. And maybe since God put you in this position, now it's time for you to use your position for something beneficial. For such a time as this. Very famous phrase. You've heard this before in the Old Testament? Maybe for such a time as this. Very famous with the Jews as well, when they talk about fate and providence from God and stuff like that, and things happening. And they'll almost always say, it happened for such a time as this. All the things that led up to this, it was for such a time as this. And they're just quoting Mordecai when they say this. Just quoting Mordecai. Well, Esther told them to reply to Mordecai. I love this back and forth. Okay. Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. This is the capital of Persia. Go, the ones who are in Susa. Hold a fast on my behalf. Again, if it was overt, it'd say fast and pray, but fast on my behalf. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young woman will also fast as you do. We'll consider how serious this is. We'll fast and basically appeal to God. And then I will go to the king, though it's against the law. And again, another very famous phrase in the Old Testament. Esther says, if I perish, I perish. This is where you got to love this woman. Mordecai says, look, you're queen, perhaps because God needs you right now. He's put you in this place. And she says, pray for me, fast and pray. Let's all get prepared for this. And fast up to this day that I'm going to go into the king, but I'll go into the king and look, if I perish, I perish. It's why we love Esther. It's why we love Esther. She's willing to swap the entirety of her placement and the luxury of being queen, this entire lifestyle that she's been gifted with, and she's willing to say, I think it's worth trading all that in for this. Wow. So Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. And no, we're not going to see any more today. We're going to wait. Oh, no, yeah. Okay, episode 3 next week is Courting Death. We're actually going to follow up after this because we're running out of time. We can't do it. But we're right on the edge of this tremendous thing of her. She's actually going to burst into the court of the king. And if you want to do a little plot spoiling, you can read ahead. That's fine. If you don't know how it works out. But we're going to leave that right here. This is like binging on Netflix series. We're not going to let you binge on Esther today. We're going to put it out just a little bit more. But if you want to, you can. But what I want to do before we leave this, because the narrative is so rich, I just want to talk about Esther and Mordecai in the few minutes we have left. Make a couple of observations. I want you to make these observations. Because remember when we started into Ruth a while back, we talked about in Ruth how narratives are neat. The stories are neat because the stories themselves and the interaction give you enough meat on the bones of the actions to give you something to chew on. Well, that's kind of an interesting narrative. There's something to chew on about the theology that's involved and some challenges to us and our following Jesus, and a lot of those things, it's an interesting thing because when it's the reverse of, if you, for instance, read one of Paul's letters that are very didactic, they're very teaching oriented, they teach you general truths about who God is, and then if you're communicating these truths, you always have to resort to an illustration. Well, it's like when I get in my car and you have to come up with an illustration. These are the reverse. You start with the illustration, it's the true narrative, and you come up with the theological ramifications. So you don't have to go reaching for illustrations. This is the illustration. Woo! That's why narratives are fun this way. And the Old Testament narratives are fun this way. But you do have to stop at the end, and let's say this was the end of your reading for a particular day. Now you need to sit back and think. Let's think about Esther for a second. So Esther is the one who won the beauty contest based on nothing she herself did. She was just born beautiful. God made her beautiful in that sense. She wins the lottery, quote unquote, to a guy, King Ahasuerus, who is, well, he's a king after all, and what he did to Vashti is undefensible. And I mean, it's just a whole bunch. He's a weird guy. But after all, she is there as queen in the palace with the king, a place of prominence and a place of great luxury in a kingdom that's subjected under the Persian Empire, and people are basically enslaved where they live. I mean, she should not be in this place because she's just a young Jewish woman. So here she is as queen. Why in the world would she choose to threaten all that by going into the king and being killed by him? Because of the Vashti history, we know he's very capable of doing this on a much lesser reason. Much lesser. So why would she do that? What do you think? Why would she do that? She knows nobody else will? Yeah, well, she understands the intercessor thing. She understands that her position makes her an intercessor, like nobody else. Her position, clearly, which she didn't seek, she has. And now, just instead of leaving it as a selfish thing to live in luxury, maybe now I'm not here to be queen, but I'm here to be intercessor. Maybe that's my role. Yeah. And she'll die for sure if she does it anyway. It's a really wonderful piece of logic on Mordecai's part, because if you think you're going to save yourself by staying here and preserving your luxury, that's not even going to happen. So you sort of got nothing to lose. And it's like that scene in Star Wars. Remember when Princess Leia Princess Leia comes out of R2-D2? Obi-Wan, your own hope. Okay, that's just my minor Star Trek. But in a real sense, what's being said right here, Mordecai is saying to her, you really are our only hope. And it looks as though you're the one because you've been placed in this place. So I think for her, she's come to this realization that, this is a crazy thing. I'm the Queen of Persia. How did that ever happen? But since that's something that clearly God can do and I did not do, then maybe God's not calling me to be Queen of Persia. Maybe God's calling me to be intercessor for all of Israel. And she's willing to give all that up, all that position for that purpose. That's an astonishing thing. And so when we sit in these narratives, you put yourself in the shoes of these people. I mean, would you have done that? I mean, really? If you'd in a very hard place to live, which America is not, it's a pretty easy place to live, but if it was a very hard place to live like Persia and all those conquered kingdoms were, and you suddenly win the lottery and you live in the king's palace and you're pampered by all these people, are you willing to give up that lifestyle in a split second to do something that is against the law and it's punishable by death? Well, would I? Maybe. But it does raise the question that the places you find yourself now, that you had very little control over being there, maybe you're not there for the purpose of just making your life easy, but because you're there as the person of an intercessor for somebody else. I think that's what raises the bigger question for a lot of us, is that God has blessed us in so many ways, not only where we live or how we live, or income, just so many different ways. We're tempted, like we talked about last week, to think, well, I won the lottery, so this is just all for me, so I'll just live in it and luxuriate in it and just love it. But it could very well be that particular place of privilege is something God's put you in for the purposes of something much greater than just making you comfortable and happy. And I think that's the challenge with Esther's life, for all of us. And not only that, many times we'll only entertain the idea of, well, I'll serve God in this position he's put me into as long as it doesn't cost me anything, as long as I can preserve this status that I have, right, that I love. So if there's a way I can kind of serve God while enjoying what he's given me, I can have both worlds together. And it could very well be that in wherever you're at, where I'm at, God could be saying, I put you in this position for a much greater good, and oh, by the way, in exercising that greater good, you're going to lose that position. And that's where things get really interesting in our Christian walk. What are you willing to give up for the purposes of using the leverage God has given you to where he's put you for his purposes? I don't know. That's a challenging one. And I can't tell you what that looks like for you. I can tell you what that looks like for me, but I can't tell you what that looks like for you. But it could very well come to a position where that's going to happen for you. And you have to ask yourself, did God do this wonderful blessing to me just to make me happy, or in order to accomplish a greater good through me? And that's why we used last week the idea of the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee is healthy because blessing comes in and blessing goes out. Dead Sea is dying because just stuff goes in and then it pools up and gets kind of rotten and stinky. So the blessings of God, if they come into your life for the purposes of going out of your life, that's actually a really healthy situation. But if you just presume that what God gives you is to make you happy and pool it up, you'll be stinky like the Dead Sea or the Great Salt Lake. So that's the idea. And that's what she's understanding right now. I think, although I'm loving where I'm at, I'm going to have to cash this in. So then she says this really famous phrase, then I'll go to the king, though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. She's willing to cash in all of her chips from what God has given her for the purposes of this. So, we don't live that dramatic a life, but I think there is a real sense in which God has put you in a position in what he's given you that, again, he doesn't want you to pull that up. He wants that to flow through you for another purpose, and sometimes it may cost you what he's given you. Just saying. Okay, let's think about Mordecai for a second. Mordecai is a more interesting issue in this particular passage. Because remember, we said we said that Mordecai, why did this entire thing happen? Roll back the story a little bit. Why did it happen? Well, because Mordecai, I'll say it this way, was too proud to bow down to Haman. He didn't want to actually give this guy any respect. He didn't really deserve the respect in that sense. So he decides to kind of, fold his arms and stand up and say, no, I don't think so. And then all the guards that are there are saying, psst, Mordecai, you really can't do that. You have to really, why aren't you bowing down to this Haman guy? This is sort of dangerous. And the story tells us they have a long conversation. This goes on for a while. Haman's going to see this. And this is wrong. Mordecai, what are you doing? What are you doing? And Mordecai says, right? And he just will not bow down to the Haman guy. And I see a lot of pride there. Because when I compared Mordecai's actions to Daniel's actions, I don't see a match. If you go back and you read Daniel's in the first generation that gets taken out in the Babylonian captivity. Mordecai is about 3 generations past that, but it's the same kind of a deal. When you see Daniel come out of Israel and get taken into captivity by the Babylonians, he does refuse to eat the non-kosher food. Okay, and he actually tries to make some deals about it. He's respectful about it, but he says, look, this is against my religion. I can't eat this stuff. So we know that issue. But we don't see Daniel disrespecting the leadership and the authority at all. In fact, so much so that after a while, even after they accommodate his food issues, they make him kind of a magistrate in Babylon. I mean, he's respected that way. So you can't become the position that Daniel goes into if you're not actually respecting the authority all the time. So Mordecai. Mordecai's just being sort of prideful. And then behind that, he tries to justify his pride against Haman by bringing in the Jewish issue. So when they ask him, why aren't you doing this? He says, well, because I'm a Jew. Oh, what a bad mistake that was. Whoa, what a bad mistake. So we're in this fix from here through the entire rest of the book of Esther because Haman wouldn't bow down, or because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to Haman. And I don't think it's an issue of principle. I think it's an issue of pride. So when we get to this juncture in this story, you look at Mordecai and you put yourselves in the shoes of Mordecai and you realize at the end of today's story, oh my gosh, what I just did got a couple million people killed. Can anyone in all the history of the Old Testament say, I did this and I got 1 million people killed? A couple million people killed? I mean, single-handedly, out of my pride and out of my arrogance and whatever it's all about, I would not respect the authority, even though Haman shouldn't be respected anyway because he's a jerk. No, I mean, you still have to respect the office of what happens there, and I wouldn't do it. And now a couple million Jews are going to die, and it was all because of me. Wow. He's in a hole. He's in a tremendous hole. I was thinking back to things that I've done in the past that were born more out of selfish motivations, prideful motivations, egotistical motivations. And they came out and they blurped out there, and even as they're coming out in slow motion, you're going, no, and you can't pull them out, and you can see the destruction happening and all this kind of stuff, because it just came out of your heart and there's no gate to stop it. And then that happens, and then you think about this could bring great destruction in the hearts of people that just, I mean, what am I thinking? Okay, you take that kind of bad feeling and you amplify it by millions, and that's where Mordecai's at right now. The whole story of Esther really wouldn't happen if Mordecai hadn't done this. And now millions of people are destined to die on one day 12 months from now. So Mordecai has a good reason to be in sackcloth and ashes. He's not just mourning for the rest of the Jews, he's mourning for himself as well. What have I done? What have I? And I did the very thing I told Hadassah not to do. Don't admit you're a Jew. And I did it in this hot moment of, impertinence. What am I thinking? And now I am alone. I, Mordecai, alone, am responsible for the death of millions of people. So we should see him in sackcloth and ashes, and we should see him appealing to God, saying, God, get me out of this hole. I mean, what have I done? I've destroyed your people. He's in a bad place. But there's a glimmer of the promises of God which tend to stabilize his soul. And did you see this going past? Because this is amazing. He's feeling like a dirtbag because he just got a couple million people killed. However, in his discussions with Hadassah, with Esther, he says, and here's the first one, who knows whether you've not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So, I mean, he could say, look, I caused this whole problem because I was being stupid. But it could very well be, if you amplify this verse a little bit, it could very well be that God anticipated my stupidity and he put my niece in place to fix things. Now that's a really hopeful message for us if you're prone to doing stupid things that can harm people. Now, I've never had the impact of killing a couple million people yet, I don't think. But there is a case where I see myself capable of doing what Mordecai did on a smaller scale, but even more profoundly hurtful to people. And you probably do too. The wonderful thing in the midst of this is that God understands your brokenness to do those kinds of things. He understands that. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean he's going to prevent the damage that happens, because that damage will happen in people's lives to a certain degree, but it's not totally out of control. It's not totally out of God's domain in that particular sense. And this is where we come back to the idea of biblical providence we introduced last week. That even in the face of Mordecai's failure and the impact of what he did, he's still telling his niece, but I think God knew this was going to happen, and I think that God put you in this place for this time to cover what I did wrong. Wow. I often pray when something has happened that I've done, many times inadvertently, but I recognize after the fact that it causes harm and it causes hurt, stuff like that. I often go back to God and say, God, I confess I'm an idiot. What was I thinking? That was my heart welling up and doing something stupid. But God, I pray that you would bring protection and healing to the people who will suffer from what I just did, because I love them and I want them to live well. And I don't want who I am and my failings to have that kind of toxic effect on people. I pray that all the time. I pray that for many of you in my relationships. I just say, God, I just don't want my failings to have that kind of sludge effect in other people's lives. Well, Mordecai is doing sort of the same thing here. He's just caused the death of 2 million, 3 million Jews. And he's saying, well, but you know what? Hey, looks like God knew this was going to happen because he put my niece in a position where she can be an intercessor. Wow. For such a time as this. And then right after that, he says, this is that curious line in verse 14. That God's going to provide relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. Well, what? First time I read that, when I first read this story, I thought, I read that wrong. That can't be right. Because he should make the Obi-Wan Kenobi plea. You're our only hope. But it turns out she's not. Because God is telling Mordecai in his heart, through something else, he's telling Mordecai in his heart that, look, even if she does not come through for us, an intercessor, even still, deliverance will rise from Jews from someplace else. What? Wow. Mordecai, that's a bad piece of logic to use on Esther. Because she'll say, it's okay. We don't need to do it because, deliverance will come from someplace else. Of course, he does follow that up with the idea, but you won't live anyway because, you're a Jew. But it's an interesting thing that in the midst of all this, he decouples our human actions, the follow-through of Esther, the follow-through of himself. He decouples those human actions from the destruction of the people of the Jews. And so Mordecai is convinced now that even though he's caused this problem, that in reality, it's not going to destroy the Jews. And what's the one thing that's bringing him that understanding? Well, God himself promised to the Jews that this would never happen, that they would never be eradicated. And you say to yourself, whoa, stop the bus here. Didn't they get taken into captivity in 723 BC by the Assyrians, and then the lower half in 586 BC by the Babylonians? Isn't that God reneging on his promise? No, because those were always meant to be temporary deals. In fact, in the Babylonian captivity, which took place later, that kind of cleaned out the last of who was left in the country, mostly Judea, when they got taken in 586, later on when they're in captivity, You know, some guys who know the Bible put together their math from the Bible and say, oh, we're only going to be here 70 years, and then we're going to go back to the land. What? How do you know that? Well, because we're here because we never let the land rest, have a Sabbath rest for the land, which is supposed to happen once, you know, 1 year, 6 years you use the land, and 1 year you let it go fallow and you let it rest. And gosh, we just never did that. And how many years did we do that? Oh, wow, gosh, over 400, 500 years. We never let the land rest. And so there's all those 1 years every 7 years that accumulated up. And so God basically told them, remember all those years you're supposed to let the land rest? I'm going to have you stay in captivity until those years go by. Well, when you do the math, it's 70 years. So they knew, well, that 70 years expired the generation before Mordecai. So they were already going back into the land. They're already going back after that 70 years has expired. So Mordecai knows, based on his old biblical teaching, that God himself will bring them back into the land, and it's going to happen. So on the one hand, although we know that we have just triggered the annihilation of several million Jews, on the other hand, God has promised that's not going to happen. So there you go. This is a great relief to me when I bring harm to people's hearts. When I say the wrong thing, when I do the wrong thing, when I don't do many things. And when I pray that God, restore and heal and work around my shortcomings and all those kinds of things. And then I remind myself that God loves the people I'm impacting more than I love those people. And he's not going to allow them to suffer harm that's so great it's going to utterly destroy them like the destruction of the Jews. It will have some negative effects, and I'll have to answer for that. And that's for sure. But in the end, even the negative effects you have on other people is moderated by the providence of God. That's an amazing thing. So the providence of God we talked about last week is that God's invisible presence in the workings of mankind and in the workings in your life are going on not only to provide good when you can't have enough foresight to see the good, but also in a sense of putting a fence around the harm that you cause on the other side. And Mordecai has seen both of these things. The good in terms of putting Hadassah in place and calling her Esther, and the prevention of total annihilation because God's providence is still protecting his people. So Mordecai is operating under these very powerful biblical ideas that God's people are still God's people, and I, Mordecai, have been a jerk. And for a whole bunch of reasons, I wish I had never done that. However, God is still shepherd of his people. Whoa. That's really encouraging to me, because Mordecai should be painted as one of the worst jerks. Yeah, Mordecai, the worst jerks of the entire Old Testament. I mean, basically in an unmeasured moment, an unrestrained moment, he put several million people in danger. Man, wow. But fortunately, providence of God, God goes ahead of him, puts his niece in place as queen. Fortunately, this queen now is predisposed to follow God's lead and to become an intercessor rather than a ruling queen. And she's willing to put it all on the table in order to follow through to be that intercessor. Wow, aren't we lucky all those things worked out? No, that's the providence of God. That's the providence of God that even goes ahead of our foolishness. It even goes ahead of our foolishness. So that's Mordecai. Wow. I think, are we done, Jim? Yes, we're done. Okay, so next week, we'll find out what happens. Looks like Esther's going to bust into court. I know, and that name Vashti just keeps ringing in my head. Vashti just didn't show up for the dinner party. She's out of here. She's gone. We don't see her anywhere else in the whole rest of Scripture. She's gone. And Esther could, in fact, just be gone after next week. That's why we love Esther. We're going to sing this song because this seemed really perfect. I will trust in you. And look at the first line. When I can't see you, I know you're there. And that's exactly what's going on with Mordecai and Esther. And even for the author of Esther. You don't see or mention God, but he's clearly in the pages. And actually, he is written in Esther, and I'll show you how in a really interesting way later on. He's actually written in Esther, but in the actual narrative itself, he doesn't show up. But there's fasting and prayer. And there's, all sackcloth and ashes and prayer. I mean, all these things are going, God's present in all that. And he is present in your life in an invisible way for good and the protection from evil. But he still calls us to be intercessors and actually cash in the blessings he gives to us for the benefit of other people and not to pool them in our lives. So that's Esther. Well, let's pray. Father in heaven, we just thank you for this wonderful account. And Lord, I pray that you challenge our hearts in the situations you've put us, whether we're in positions of extraordinary blessing and privilege, like Esther had gone through, and pray you'd give us an understanding perhaps of ways in which you want us to use that as a platform in some way to be a blessing to other people, to pass through us to others and not just pull it up ourselves. And Lord, with Mordecai's example, I pray you'd give us an understanding of how much harm we can do in a singular thoughtless moment. But Lord, we are encouraged by the fact that you bring healing and you bring protection in some degrees in the places where we bring disaster and chaos. And Lord, we're just not really great at this. But you call us to be used by you in the places we go, and we know that you indeed are sovereign in all these things. Your providence rules the good and the bad in all of these things. And you get what you get regardless, even though you want us to be involved up to our eyeballs. And that, we don't know how that works, but it does. So thank you for involving us in this wonderful work you do about declaring who you are to those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death. And we pray that your Spirit would work through us in powerful ways, far beyond our human abilities, in order to glorify who you are and to call many to yourself. So thanks for the story. Continue to use your Holy Spirit in us to give us insight as these days go on with this very easy story to carry in our hip pockets through our days. So thanks now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Why don't you stand up?
When I can't see you, I know you're here. When I can't feel you, I will not fear. I will trust in you, and I will not be afraid. And when the battle is close at hand, I know you're with me.
You're dismissed.